Yes, dear ladies and gentlemen, good evening, everybody. My name is Barbara Blankensteiner, and I'm the curator of the African Art Department here at the Yale University Art Gallery. And it is a great pleasure and honor to introduce Professor Peter Breunig, who joined us from Germany to speak on the Nok Terracotta Enigma this evening. He only recently returned to Germany from a field trip to Namibia, where he is researching spectacularly new discovered rock art close to Twyfelfontein. We are very happy that he made it to New Haven, because until yesterday morning, it was unclear that he could fly because there was a major strike at Frankfurt Airport. So he's here now, and we're very glad. I first met Peter Breunig when I visited his excavation site at Nok in central Nigeria in 2008, where he showed me around, and I was deeply impressed to see what they are doing and excavating. And I'm really glad that he accepted to give this lecture and spare some time out of his busy schedule. Peter Breunig is professor at the Goethe University in Frankfurt since 1992 and is head of the African Archaeology Department. His research focused on rock art in southwestern Africa, on cultural development and its interdependency with climate and vegetation changes in the West African savanna and in Central Africa. He has undertaken archaeological field research in Burkina Faso, Namibia, and Nigeria. He is also the editor of the Journal of African Archaeology. We invited Peter Breunig to talk about Nok art and culture, his most recent and renowned research project, because, as you might know, the Yale University Art Gallery owns the largest museum collection of Nok terracotta art and related cultures in the country, thanks to a donation in 2010 by Susanna and Joel Gray, who are here with us today. The Nok culture, named after a village close to the first site of discovery, is famous for its clay figures, some even almost life-sized, which are the oldest known examples of sculptural art in West Africa. In addition, the smelting furnaces from Nok sites further showed evidence for early metallurgy in West Africa. The discovery of Nok art goes back to accidental finds from deposits in open tin mines made in the mid-1940s. An earlier piece, one single piece, has been found in 1928. First archaeological excavations have been organized by the British archaeologist Bernard Fagg in the 1950s and 60s. The terracotta sculptures became largely known with Bernard Fagg's publication on Nok art in 1977. It took another 40 years until new investigations have been made. In 2005, Peter Breunig and his team started a long-term archaeological project on Nok in collaboration with the Nigerian Commission for Museums and Monuments in Nigeria and funded by the German Research Council, that is still ongoing today and has yielded some really fascinating results that he will present to us today. In 2013, he and his team organized an exhibition at the Liebighaus Museum in Frankfurt, where they showed their findings and excavations from the Nok research. And this museum is in Frankfurt. And the catalog published along with the exhibition has become the major source book for Nok art and culture since Bernard Fagg's early publication in the 70s. The lecture will take approximately an hour, and after that there is room for questions, and after we invite you for a reception in the lobby. So please welcome Peter Breunig.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. The strike indeed did keep me very nervous until the end. Maybe you allow me to start that English was my worst subject in school. And my late English teacher would not believe what I try to do here. He more would say, you will not be able to complete one sentence without any mistake. Well, nevertheless, I would not like to read a well-written academic paper because I do not like such presentations. I always find it quite boring. So please, I apologize for the struggles with grammar and vocabulary, but nevertheless, I hope I can explain what I want to explain here. I have the pleasure to invite you to follow me to Nigeria in West Africa, to a place called Nok. If I talk in Germany about this topic, Nok is always mixed with the National Olympic Committee. This is, of course, not the case here. We go to a village approximately in the center of Nigeria, and whenever you consult textbooks or the web about prehistoric art in Africa, you sooner or later will come across Nok. This is a view of the village, not really impressive or specific, but for some inhabitants still it's the home of civilization, and there is a misunderstanding that the whole Nok culture was born in this area, but you might be aware that in science sometimes entities are simply labeled according to the place where the materials first have been discovered. But for African archaeology, this is one of the most famous villages in Africa. It's famous because during colonial times, this just has been mentioned, there had been tin mining activities, open-air tin mining. All these holes were dug by manpower. And in such alluvial deposits, which can go down more than 10 meters and so, there had been made some discoveries. The very first one in 1928, here in such a tin mine very close to Nok. It was classified as an anthropomorphic figurine or as a monkey, and disappeared somewhere in a collection of curiosities in the box of the owner of the tin mine. Some decades later, the other find was made in 1943 at a site called Jema'a, after it was used as a scarecrow for a whole year. And then it came into the attention of a young British archaeologist. His name already was mentioned, Bernard Fagg, who was trained in archaeology, but he was in charge for other things in Nigeria. When he came across these finds, he realized that there is something special with the objects. First, he saw that they are very similar in some aspects, like the particular appearance of the eyes, the elaborated hairdo, and even the size of one of these heads. So the right one is almost life-size. Since art is related very close to culture, he classified these objects as Nok culture. Also, today we are a little bit careful with such kind of expressions because cultures means a little bit more than just a few terracotta objects. Bernard Fagg organized further research and very soon came across more discoveries in other tin mines, but all from alluvial deposits. That means not in original primary position, but somewhere removed from let's say, from higher level, washed down into such deposits. 70 sites until 1977 were found located between Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, and the metropolis of Jos on the Jos Plateau, and most clustered around the center, but you see one was far in the north and another one far in the south, 600 kilometers distance from each other. And if you plot the area with a circle, you will get about 100,000 square kilometers. I have checked that this is about 7 times the size of Connecticut, so quite a respectable distribution. He found approximately 100 fragments of terracotta. A few are shown here. I would underline fragments, not one piece is totally is complete. Then the dating, of course, was a very exciting matter. It was a little bit a kind of a guesswork, geological guesswork. going up to East Africa to find relation in deposit sequences. But it was also the years when radiocarbon was developed or produced the first dates, or other dating techniques like thermoluminescence. They scatter over a long period, as indicated here, for up to 1000 BC, but Bernard Feck did not dare to take the whole time span as the duration of the Nok culture, but proposed a duration from 500 BC to about 200 AD, and this is the period which the dating still you can find in many publications. Today, things have changed a little bit. Nok became famous for the oldest large-scale sculptures in sub-Saharan Africa. There was nothing similar known in these days before. But there was also another discovery produced by excavations in a site called Taruga. This was in the 1960s. This was the first excavation where material, also terracotta, was not found deep in the ground in alluvial deposits, but very close to the surface, possibly in an area where former settlement existed. But most important from Taruga was the discovery of iron smelting furnaces, also dated by radiocarbon to around the middle of the first millennium BC, and in these days the earliest iron in sub-Saharan Africa. So terracotta and iron, Nok became an enigmatic complex. These two materials placed as the earliest evidence so far known in Africa. Not much happened afterwards. We just heard that the publication by Feck appeared in 1977. There had been some small test diggings afterwards carried out by his daughter or by a Nigerian scholar, Joseph Jemkur. But mostly what appeared afterwards was there some exaggerated ideas were produced about Noks. So you can find this idea where the Nok terracotta might have been used standing in a temple where there is no archaeological evidence for any kind of this temple, or that other researchers had the idea, aware that it's pure speculation, that the extensive production of iron created the material basis for an early kingdom near Nok. Kingdom, that is quite an exciting hypothesis, and that the king of this state would then have had the wealth to be able to give patronage to artists who in turn created the new kind of sculptures. No, this was the speculation in these days. Nevertheless, Nok terracotta became very popular also in the international art market. And if you check the internet, this is what I did a few days ago, you will see that some of these objects are sold for $120,000. Even bodies without head or leg can bring up to $9,000. So if you know Nigeria, and I know Nigeria since 30 years, such a kind of possibility to make cash money, of course, will be used very intensively. And the result is that the objects were excavated by illicit digging from local inhabitants. You see one example here. This is already a couple of years ago, where the whole site is turned upside down and perforated landscapes are left. Involved are the villagers, and we were told by those dealers who organize this kind of looting up to 300 people who scatter such a site in less than a week. And then you can imagine that the whole archaeological or scientific context is totally destroyed. We know a little bit the way these objects then go. There are, of course, local dealers. Even the traditional rulers are involved in this kind of business. The administration is aware, but they don't know, or actually they don't know how to stop this. Here another example, also excavated some years ago, carried out by a collaborator in the meantime here, Mr. Kishimi. who was active in digging throughout the 1990s and well, actually until the last few years. So he knows quite well what was going on these sites. You see, the pits are not refilled and the land is useless for farming. Kishimi told us that at this site, but in many others as well, many full body, how they call it, that means complete figurines, and so-called passports, this is the upper part of the body, were found in these holes. The looting still continues until now. This is a picture taken in January, where not very large teams like before, but smaller teams, here only 4 were involved, operate by trial and error. They were looking, like you can see here, for what they call gira. Gira is a Hausa word and means sign, and sign means charcoal, sometimes pottery, or any kind of cultural deposit in the ground. If they hit by these small diggings, something like this, they continue deep in the ground, supposing that, and this is really the case in most cases, the deposits derive from the Nok culture. So if they are successful, digging continues in a way you can see here, following cultural deposits deep in the ground. The diggings sometimes go down to 2 meters and more. The archaeological context is totally destroyed. I mentioned before there had been hundreds of laborers. Now apparently the business is going down a little bit. There are small teams and they work for some weeks on such a site, but after this the whole area is ransacked over hectares. It was always my dream to come across to such a site and have scientific excavation before the looters do the job, because if this would be possible, many or let's say the Nok enigma possibly would have been solved in the meantime. The looters are only looking for terracotta, if possible for complete terracotta. Things they cannot sell will remain at the site, indicated here by the arrow. Many fragments and archaeologists are used to work with fragmentation. So we can take a lot of information out of this, and therefore we collect them, or even the diggers bring them to us because they know we still use them. And in our field laboratory, the enormous quantities were cleaned and recorded. Broken treasures with a lot of information and many details. Here you see a few examples. Like part of the head indicating the hairdo, or body parts, some arms with bracelets, legs. Even we have so many legs in the meantime that it would be possible to make a typology of the Nok legs. And some parts are very exciting, like here the head of a snake. The international art market is flooded by objects from looted sites. Here are some masterpieces. Maybe you know or you saw before the one in the center, which is standing in the Louvre. But it's also possible that some of them might be fakes. In particular, the left one, I have my doubt that this is an original one. We never found any remains so far which indicate horses or animals like this. And fakes are a good business. The illicit diggings cannot satisfy the demands on the market, so we came into contact with people involved in making this kind of fakes, and we even were allowed to document their work. At the starting point of this kind of copies is to use original fragments. So somehow the fakes have a little bit of original material inside. The fragments were ground, and then the grounded material or the powder is added to the clay. So at least homeopathic traces of original terracotta is involved. The terracotta we observed and we analyzed from our excavated materials were made in a coil technique, as you can see here. This is the only tool, a pointed twig of a hard wood, which is used to make this kind, you see it here in action, separating the upper and the lower leg by cutting a groove, or here by decorating a waist bell. All this is a job of a few minutes. Here you see a bracelet, bracelets are made, and a necklace, and the job is almost complete here. This is what they call the philosopher, where the chin is lying on top of the folded arms, and the very last step is to groove the pupils, somehow the symbolic procedure to make a person alive. 3 hours, and Audu Washi has completed the philosopher. This is one kind to make copies of Nok terracotta. There is another one which is even more sophisticated. Sometimes the diggers can find pieces like this. If they were not brought to us in our area, they are used as parts in terracotta, using the original fragment, which cannot be sold, and integrated in figurines like this here. A man kneeling on a pot turned upside down with raised arm and an open hand to carry something, maybe a spear. This is a work which takes a little bit longer. It was about 3 days, and then afterwards a kind of post-processing. It is burned in charcoal, and soil from original Nok sites is filled into the interior of the terracotta. So if one thinks French colleagues once had the idea to do so, to check inside the terracotta for charcoal remains and make radiocarbon dating, you will get a proper date, because the charcoal is original Nok. But the figurine has nothing to do with Nok apart from the few fragments which were used. Why they do this might be for some kind of ritual relation to give them an original appearance. For this reason, they also attach soil as a kind of patina to let them give them a looking as if they are embedded in the ground. Well, this is the final product, ready to be sold, but in this case, it now decorates my office. Barbara Blankensteiner mentioned that we started in 2005. This is a story for its own, why we did that. I was in Nigeria a long time before, working in the Chad Basin, and we discovered, let's say, the beginning of sedentary farming communities and a very intensive cultural change around the middle of the first millennium with evidence of complex societies. Large settlements, mass production of pottery, a large population, intensive harvest, and the increasement of the storage capacity, a lot of other things, around 500 BCs in the Chad Basin. And one of the points to look at Nok was to check whether there are similar developments in other parts of West Africa. And of course, simply if you see the sophisticated art of the Nok culture, one can imagine that somehow a complex community was behind this. So we had a kind of pilot study in 2005. My students and collaborators made a very proper preparation. Nigeria is not an easy country, and here they got some first information how to behave there. In the first year, we spent most energy to find Nok sites. For the foreigner, it's not easy to just walk around, even if it is many kilometers like here. Foreigners will not find sites where you just start digging in the hope to excavate Nok terracotta. Nothing from Nok sites is visible on the surface. And the landscape is beautiful in an immense dimension and a very frustrating matter. to find in this mountainous area NOC sites. So we used local informants, or at least got contact to local informants through our Nigerian colleagues who know NOC sites simply because they already were digging at these sites. This, by the way, is not far away from NOC. NOC just is on the other side, maybe 10 kilometers, and there are many NOC sites in this area. Our informant was Umaro Potiskum, whom you see here. He somehow did grow up with terracotta because his father, Yusuf Potiskum, was the right hand of Bernard Feck and helped him to localize more materials in the tin mining area. Today, Umaro is a dealer, and nevertheless, he enabled us direct access to NOC sites. And here you see the not very spectacular beginning of digging. It's checked in less than 1 day whether this is a NOC site or not by having diagnostic find materials, which we did not know in the beginning, but this is research. If you start, you soon will learn what is typical or diagnostic for NOC and what not. So the upper part is not NOC. It's a kind of objects with these raised dots, or the decoration of the pottery is something which took place later, and this kind of iron tools also had not been found in NOC context so far. Typical, on the other way, are these materials in the lower row, pottery with a specific decoration, and of course the NOC terracotta. We carried out many test diggings, small trenches located between the looted areas, because the sites are not totally in every corner looted between the individual holes. There still are deposits which had not been affected by the diggings. In some cases successful, for instance, discovering features like the one you see below here, a semicircle stone setting, which gives some ideas how the NOC sites might have been organized. Or NOC terracotta in a stratigraphic context associated with charcoal, and therefore there is a possibility to get a radiocarbon date and to learn about the age of the NOC culture. Of course, we have incorporated local people and colleagues from the university and trained them to do specific jobs like Fatima. She was trained by our archaeobotanists and later learned how to extract all chart or all organic material from the deposit, which then will be analyzed under the microscope and which give us idea what kind of crops or what kind of food was planted, or even to identify the species of wood to get some information about the appearance of the environment. Obadiah, on the other hand, a young man from the village where we are working, learned to operate the total station, a big job because in the excavation every find was from the beginning measured in a 3-dimensional grid. Within 3 years, until 2008, we discovered 30 new sites, somehow in the vicinity of those which already were known to Bernard Feck. We have not studied very intensively the southern area and the north, so today we have the impression that the NOC culture might be more focused in the central area between Abuja and Jos. Digging provided abundant terracotta fragments. You see them here. Bernard Feck, after a few decades, had 150 objects. Within a few years, we had more than, from one side, almost 1,700 pieces from terracotta. So a very solid base to get some more information about the stylistic variation of the pottery. The art seems to be omnipresent, but still they all are broken. There is not one single complete terracotta until these days, and until today we don't have any one. So if I see in the internet or in the art market complete terracotta, we are very careful whether this might not be produced by those people able to make what the market is asking for, but the diggers cannot provide. Besides terracotta, all other categories of find materials we normally have in archaeology are found, like iron objects, abundant pottery, in some cases stone beads or kind of adornment, and other stone artifacts like grinding equipment or ground stone axes and these stone balls down on the right. Then it was very important that the German Research Foundation in 2009 decided to have a 12-year funding for further research, and the very beginning was to establish a research station, which you see here. We got land from the local ruler in the vicinity and means and support to construct buildings which can host up to 30 participants. And the constant presence of our team, at least in the first years before it became difficult in Nigeria because of the political situation to go there with young students, the constant presence was of particular importance because there was a kind of confidence between our team and those people living in the village next by. All inhabitants of this village were diggers. The one you know already, this is Kishimi, who did show us the sites. Behind us his brother. After 2 or 3 years of our presence, they present all their knowledge about Nok sites, and we very soon got an idea about the quantity of materials which had been there. This is the situation in 2008. Just a few sites seen or interpreted as a sign of high density and chosen as a study area. And after 2 years of survey and with the help of the information from the local inhabitants, we got an unrespected result of more than 200 sites in that small area, which is, you see, 15 kilometers east-west and 20 kilometers north-south. That means statistically 1.8 Nok site in each square kilometer. Let me jump to the present, because we have continued the location of Nok sites and the density of sites recorded so far. It seems to show that Nok sites appear all over in central Nigeria. Until the mid-2040, we had located, with the help of local people who partly were involved in digging these sites, we have located almost 600 sites, not individual finds, like, let's say, a fragment of terracotta and a few potsherds, but settlements of 1 or 2 or even more hectares in size. They are all destroyed by looting, and you can understand, for me as a scientist, the loss for science is unbelievable. The Nok culture will disappear. It's only a question of time, and this was one of the arguments for the funding of our project, to rescue information from the ground, what can be done at the moment. If you see this density of sites, they cannot all be kingdoms or cities, or we have in the meantime the impression that all these sites are an indication of a kind of dispersed settlement system. The sites are very small, less than 1 hectare. We can identify the size of the sites because this is one benefit of the digging. The diggers will dig as long as is their material in the ground. So somehow the holes on the surface we can measure today, or we can see today, more or less reflect the dimension of the site which is buried in the ground. Small quantity of sites also point to that is not a big settlement, that is a small, well, a hamlet or a homestead or a small village. And there are also no substantial stratigraphies indicating that there was a constant occupation over a long period. So the conclusion: no town, no villages, but dispersed settlements, decentralized settlement system possibly looking like this example you see here of a Fulani camp in our study area. One focus in the beginning of the project was the dating and the chronology. This is the assumption of Bernard Fack in the beginning, 500 BC to 200 AD, and after the measurement of, in the meantime, it's more than 200 radiocarbon dates, the situation has changed completely. This is the summed probability density of all these sites. It goes a little bit too much in statistic to explain that here. Simply, the curve will indicate where we have evidence of the dating of the Nok culture. And all radiocarbon dates are made from annually growing plants. That means seeds from some grasses, from millet, for instance. So they are very precise and have not the problem Bernard Fack was facing, that by dating wood, which can have an initial age of several hundred years already. Now the duration of the whole complex has changed. The beginning seems to be around 1500 BC until the beginning of our era. There is a subdivision in three phases, as archaeologists normally do, early, middle, and late, and corresponding to the emergence, the boom, and the collapse of a well-defined archaeological complex. The phases are defined by a change of the pottery. We have excavated over the years approximately 90,000 potsherds from 42 excavations, and 15,000 are decorated and had been analyzed by a collaborator in a PhD. Gabi Franke has defined 7 different stylistic groups. I will not go through all these groups, maybe just indicate that the second half of the second millennium is characterized by a pottery decoration which more or less covers the whole of the body of the pot. Then in the middle phase there is a concentration of this decoration in a band demarcated by incised lines, and in the late Nok period there is again an extension of the bands. In the first millennium AD, what still was Nok culture according to the dating of Bernard Fack, the pottery is totally different, a totally different technique used as a roulette, where some carved wood, for instance, were rolled over the pottery, leaving a very sophisticated technique which has not been used in the Nok culture. We therefore stop the duration of the Nok culture around the change of the era. Plant food has been studied, I mentioned it already, through archaeobotanical sampling, and there are cultivated plants right from the beginning. That means the Nok culture is a culture of sedentary farmers. They plant millet and cowpea from the Middle Nok period, and used a variation of wild plants, in particular at the late Nok period. This makes the Nok culture not to what it has been before as an early Iron Age complex, but we are now considering the Nok culture as the beginning, what we call in Europe Neolithic, or let's say the beginning of sedentary farming communities. The three phases witnessed the emergence of important cultural and economic innovation. First, as mentioned, farming, then the sculptural art, and third, iron. We are here in an art museum, so I think I will focus on the art and will not talk about the iron. The terracotta do not appear from the beginning. This is in the meantime quite sure. We have not found any terracotta objects in the second millennium BC. They appear in the early middle knock phase, and the question is, why do farmers start to produce abundant terracotta sculpture after the whole culture existed already since 500 years? We have a problem with radiocarbon date in this period. The production of radiocarbon in the upper atmosphere was not constant, or not according to a model which can produce a linear relation between the true age and the radiocarbon age. That means we cannot date very precise between 800 and 400 BC. Any date from this period cannot identify either 800 or 400. And this is a lot of problem, because many radiocarbon dates we have produced fall into this, what we call the Hallstatt Plateau, because it's the period of Hallstatt in European prehistory. But a few of these datings from associated with terracotta clearly are dated to 800 to 900 BC. That means before the plateau. So for this reason, it's possible that the whole complex of the Nok culture is a very brief event, and that all the other dates which we have going up to 400 BC are somehow an artifact produced by the problems we have with the calibration of the radiocarbon dates. If this is the case, that the Nok culture were produced only in 100 or 200 centuries, this would explain why we cannot see so far any clear stylistic development within the whole complex. Where are they coming from is another important question. There are no predecessors known. From the Chad Basin, we know these tiny clay figurines which are dated to the 2nd and to the 1st millennium BC, but I think you agree this has nothing to do with Nok terracotta. Maybe objects, if the Nok terracotta had a longer tradition, maybe there had been objects in the early period of this complex which has been made by perishable materials, for instance, like wood. I would like to show you a few examples of those terracotta which we have excavated. There's a very solid database, a few thousand pieces in the meantime, and we were allowed with the permit of the respective authorities to bring them to Germany and study them under laboratory analysis. Most of them are from a well-documented context, which is part of another PhD program. Animals are extremely rare. We would be happy to have more information about the animals, because no bones have survived in the acid soil of the area of the Nok culture. For that reason, we don't know what kind of domestic animals they used. But those animals which are produced by the Nok culture are very hard to identify. At least the species only in some rare occasions be identified. But there are no domestic animals. We should expect cattle, goat, or sheep. But what we find are mostly snakes or lizards. A few examples you see here. There is a double-headed lizard on a pot. The right face is broken, but you can see the beginning of the eyes, which is in a typical Nok experience. Then snakes are attached on vessels here. This is the head of a snake going around on the rim of the pot. And sometimes they appear as single objects, as you see them here or here. Snakes are very important, and if you go into the ethnographic literature, you will see that snakes have a high ritual significance, which possibly also did exist in the Nok culture. Here, snakes, you see an example for snakes with an interaction with some human figures. This one we call the snake man. 3 snakes are clamped under each arm, and 1 snake is in each hand, looking as a sign of the total control of snakes. Most terracotta show humans. They are all similar in the position, in the decoration, in faces, and particular in the shaping of the eye and the hairdo or the headgear, but none are identical. They all show individuals, but somehow they appear united by a similar appearance. Possibly the similarity of all these human figures is that they do not show people alive, but maybe people who are dead. Here, this one has wings on the back, for which we have no explanation. Some have very bizarre faces. This one in our team is called the Homer Simpson. Another unusual figurine, this is from a site which was looted in January and thrown away. It's a man wrapped in a blanket or a coat. You can see the legs here. One hand is visible, the face was up here. He's sitting on a pot turned upside down. Face and the upper body is highly damaged. And the blanket, and this is a funny something, is decorated with two human faces here, also in a typical Nok style. Faces sometimes also appear as decoration on ceramic vessels. We get a lot of exciting information from the terracotta. For instance, here from this one, indications of a far distance contact. It's the upper body of a friendly-looking man because of the beard, excavated about 2 years ago. What we thought in the beginning is a strange kind of hairstyle was, after careful examination, nothing else but a copy of a shell mussel. I think you may agree. We gave the object to experts who are able to identify such kind of mussels, and the result was quite astonishing. This is a marine sea shell, and the sea from the distribution area of the find spot is about 700 kilometers further to the south. That means somehow objects were transported, or at least the knowledge from such objects were transported over such large distances. Maybe here I want to show you that the eyes of the Musselman are not in a horizontal line, but they are somehow sloping. This is not a unique matter. We have found this in many other cases, not knowing what is the meaning behind. Terracotta sometimes show details which go beyond decoration. This is one example where we possibly have an indication of weapon. In the beginning, we were claiming that these were very peaceful people. We couldn't find any in the lithic material or in the iron objects any project points. We saw no weapons on the terracotta depicted, but here, if you see this, or maybe this, in the meantime, we think that these are weapons used to throw sling stones. A ball is attached to a rope, sometimes with a handle, and such stones are very, very common in almost every site. They have an average weight of between 200 and 400 grams, and those local people who still know that this kind of weapon was used in antiquity claim that this is the proper weight you need for this kind of weapon. Evidence of bows also had been found. Many arms carry what we originally thought are bracelets, but an alternative is a kind of an airbag or an arm protector to absorb the rebounding bowstring. This is a well-known equipment to archers. Here you see an ethnographic example from Burundi, and the open hand. Oops, sorry, that was too fast. And the open hand, which is very common among many fragments of Nok arms, possibly was carrying or represents remains of the bow. Sometimes even here the bow and the string is visible. So the Nok culture, not surprising, but there is evidence that they used bow and arrow. Then there are therianthropic creatures. Here a man with carnivore teeth and possibly a decoration which should indicate a leopard on the nose. The head is covered by a cap and the ears are in an anatomically impossible position. Another mixture between animal and man, this is the birdman, the human skull with decoration, human eyes and nose, and here if you remove the lower part you see there is a mighty beak of a bird. Many figurines are known. Some show couples or twins. Here 2 examples in a charming position. And there are many potsherds or let's say decoration of maybe ritual pots which provide information like the one you see here. This was attached to a large vessel. It's a boat, 2 men holding paddles and transporting goods which cannot be identified, but possibly yams, roots which cannot be identified through archaeobotanical examination. This is the only evidence, or very important evidence, that the Nok people used watercraft, and the second oldest evidence for watercraft in the prehistory of Africa. The other one is 8,000 years old, is also from Nigeria, and was excavated by my team in 2094. Another important story, somebody is sitting on and beating a drum which is fixed on a rope hanging over the shoulder. To my knowledge, the oldest evidence of music in sub-Saharan Africa. All examples I have shown you here, and we can continue for hours, are from the key study area, from this small part. And we have recently visited an area which is in the northeastern fringe of the distribution area of the Nok culture, because we got some information that there are regional styles, that the Nok terracotta are not looking similar all over, but there are regional differences. In this area, this is the place where some farmers found fragments of terracotta a few weeks ago, and they didn't know what to do with it. Not all farmers are looters. People in this area, they are not aware of the economic value of the objects, and they told us normally they throw it away because they don't know what to do with it. They allowed us to carry the fragments for documentation because it's easy to identify that they looked different from what we know from the Nok culture. We had started to refit the broken parts and got 3 human sculptures which are different from what is known from Nok so far. One is here. You see, it's a man with a crude face and a beard, almost no decoration, and on the right, 2 men sitting on a pot touching the back to each other. Here, this is the largest object. 3 men also fixed on a pot, shoulder on shoulder. To avoid the complicated export of these materials to Europe and to document there, we use a new kind of documentation. Maybe, I don't know whether the museum also make use of this structure from motion, is the method called, where the objects are documented by a lot of photographies. If you see here in the model later, the position of the individual photos can be localized, and specific software will calculate a 3-dimensional model, and from this model allows to turn the object in any position and to export the position from all angles which are desired. Here, example of the terracotta with 3 persons standing on a pot, shoulder on shoulder. Between the arms are again snakes, and you see the crude face. Our Nigerian collaborators call these the ugly Nok. And the radiocarbon dates, which we got from associated material from the interior, which in this case is really original deposit because there is no fake, is like the other dates. It's Mittelnock. It's not what we originally thought. It's the beginning, and later they became more sophisticated. So it's all the same time period. The model allows close up to export details, like here you see the snake placed between the bended arms of two humans and the face of one of the three humans, which looks a little bit unfriendly. Other software allows to make a film out of the model, which you see here, which I think is a quite suitable method to make documentation in the field. Okay, I hope I convinced you about the quality of this documentation. Yeah. Okay, I have shown you 34 terracotta, but our documentation comprises several hundreds, and the documentation and analysis is a big job, and another big job is the understanding of the context of the terracotta, which I had in mind to show you here in more details, but I see my time is already over. So let me just summarize that we, so far from the excavation, have two cases. And one case simply is what we call the waste hypothesis, that the fragments of the terracotta are lying together with ordinary waste material in the archaeological deposits, and we have no explanation other than simply the terracotta, after they had been used, they are somehow broken and they came into context of normally other waste materials in a settlement. The other case is shown here. This is deliberately deposition of intentionally broken terracotta. Here an example we have excavated in 2011, which are quite rare to find because you must be very lucky just to hit a place where these kind of deposits had been made. Here you see 7 parts at one spot. Even here no sculpture is complete. We have other examples, and the recent discovery is that very close to these deposits there are what we suppose to be burials. I mentioned that there are no bones survived in the acid soil, but in some cases, and in the meantime really regularly associated with this kind of deposits, there are upright standing stones, sometimes grinding stones are involved, and next to these stones are complete pots, very fine decorated pots, which one can assume they had not been used for cooking or for other daily use, but possibly were used as grave good from burials. In one case, there is a chain of stone beads still in an anatomically correct position, as if it was placed around the neck. So the final proof, we just work at the moment with X-ray fluorescence analysis by sampling the ground and trying to identify high concentration, for instance, of phosphate and of calcium, which will be accumulated if organic material like a dead body decays. So at the moment, concerning the explanation, at least of those terracotta which had not become waste, could be that they are somehow related to burials. And this is what we will do in the next years. We still have 5 years' time to continue our studies. The harder you look, the more you will find. Also, you will not find what you are looking for. So there might be still some some discoveries we have not yet, and maybe in a few years I will be allowed to come back to Yale and give a report on what has been completed in the meantime. I thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much for this very interesting lecture. So if there are questions or comments, we have time.
I'm sorry. A lot of the figurines wear beads. It looks like rather thick strings of beads. You did mention beads of stone. Would that at all be what is shown, or what other explanation of the beads would there be?
Yeah, we think that beads, stone beads, definitely were used. There are enormous quantities. Sometimes the beads can be found in pots which are buried in the ground, even in this what I have described as graves. But you are right. If there had been beads from organic material, we will not find them. There is no chance for organic material, wood, bone, or other things to survive in this acid environment for 2,500 years. Some of the stone beads, in some, for instance, necklaces, it's even the separation of the individual beads is indicated, and if you see the size, this probably can fit with the dimension of stone beads. But there, of course, there must be a lot of other materials which had been used for this decoration.
Yes, hi. Are there any arrangement, when you have all these sculptures, like around or facing north, facing south? Is there anything you were able to find, or just too fragmented?
Those pieces from settlements have no clear orientation because they are not deposited. It's just by accidentally to which side they are directed. And the deposits like the one here, we have just a handful, and there is no clear indication that they face north, south, or whatsoever.
This art just doesn't appear this sophisticated. Can you speculate on what pre-Nok was? If we go from 2,500 years ago, does this go back? And the second question I had was, do you see any Egyptian influence in this art?
Let me start with the second one. No. It's very simple. You might find some parallels by the gesture of some of the terracottas, but if you imagine the distance in between, and in 2,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago, the Sahara Desert was more or less what it is today. It was green, and people could move in early and middle Holocene times, but in these days there was really a frontier between, or an inaccessible belt between Egypt and this area. At least in a way that you cannot explain that all these things were influenced by Egypt. The other question, Nok is the oldest large-scale terracotta art in sub-Saharan Africa. There is nothing known from earlier periods. That doesn't mean that it is the birth of art as it was indicated by a book here. Art in Africa has an antiquity which possibly goes back 70,000, if not 100,000 years, by the production of pigments, by the decoration of hematite stones with some kind of linear pattern, or even rock pictures or engravings which have an age of 30,000 years in southern Africa. But concerning sculptural art, we don't so far know anything which could be serve as a predecessor of the Nok terracotta.
Did you find any exotic materials in any of your excavations to indicate trade with other areas?
No. Very simple, no.
Hi. Are there any plans that you, with your university connections in Germany and you're working with the National Commission for Museums and Monuments in Nigeria, to build a decent exhibition, either in the Nok area or at the Jos Museum, for educational purposes, using some of this material?
Yeah, definitely. This is on the way at the moment. Barbara Blankensteiner mentioned the exhibition we had in Germany. This was simply, the idea was to show this to the German public, because they funded all our studies, and all the materials had been brought back to Nigeria in the meantime. They are in Kaduna. There is a political decision that the exhibition should be shown in Kaduna. We only wait for the whole exhibition display material, which is more difficult to repatriate than the terracotta. And then the National Commission has renovated the museum in Kaduna. The gallery is much larger than it has been before, and ready to carry this exhibition as a constant, permanent exhibition then. And of course, all the information about our research will be included.
Thank you for sharing this wonderful information. I'm wondering if you find any connection between the Nok eye and the Yoruba eye in sculptural style.
Yeah. This I was told several times, that the Nok eye is very similar to the Yoruba, to the eye of those Yoruba objects. But I don't know whether your question has in mind to argue that there is a relation, or at least a development from Nok to Yoruba. I think this is an overestimation of similarities. After Nok, there is 1 millennium where we have no other materials in Nigeria of this kind. The next one is Ile-Ife, and to Yoruba there still is another few centuries time gap in between. So they are similar, but that does not mean that they have some kind of inspiration or at least genetic relation.
I wasn't, well, when you add genetic, that makes a difference to the rest of what you said. But if the people looked similar, perhaps their illustrations would be similar. The makers of the statuary.
But the eyes are not looking, nowhere in the world the eyes are looking like the one which had been depicted by the Nok people. It's a semicircle, not the oval-shaped eye. Or did I not understand your question correct?
Perhaps you did, and perhaps we see the sculpture differently.
You mentioned furnaces, and I know you didn't have time to go into the iron, but do you have can you say anything about the distribution of furnaces? Are they as widely scattered as the terracotta, or do you think that terracotta was more made in certain places and then distributed?
Thank you for this question, because you mentioned two aspects. I could not go into details. This is a lecture for its own. The manufacture of terracotta, originally we thought that there had been central manufacture places. This is a long story because the clay of the terracotta or the geochemical fingerprint of the clay is very similar. Yeah, all terracotta, even maybe we can use that as a kind of test whether it's a fake or an original one. All those authentic pieces had been measured by X-ray fluorescence analysis, and the clay is very, very similar. And for this reason, we supposed that there had been central places where these terracotta had been produced. But we haven't found these places so far. And if you have in mind, it was one spot where they took the clay. This must a big hole in the landscape, which everybody should know. So these places do not exist. In the meantime, this was the result of a PhD. The idea is that the terracotta were made by specialists, but not in centralized places. They were, let's say, walking around, going to the individual villages and offer their service. While the other pottery objects, the clay vessels, were made locally, individually in the villages, because the clay differs from one side to the other. Iron is a PhD which will be completed in a few weeks, and we have abundant quantities of furnaces, simply for the reason that the furnaces are not in danger. You can make money out of that. And since now our informants in the area know that we do not only look for NOC sites and NOC terracotta, that we also are interested in this kind of circles, which still can be seen all over the landscapes. Whenever I come, they show us dozens of new sites where there are furnaces. We know how the NOC furnaces are looking like. It's not if it is the earliest iron production in this part of Africa, maybe they should be very small or at least show evidence of an experimental stage. But they are very large, 1 meter and more in diameter. But the wall is only preserved seldom, rarely more than half a meter. The furnaces are not isolated. There is always a whole group. We have excavations where up to 7 furnaces are one to each other. Properly dated into the NOC period, so the amount of iron production was enormous. And there is no specific location in relation to settlement. They are everywhere, but geographical information system analysis possibly will show that there are some specific environmental condition, proximity to water, to wood, because enormous quantities of charcoal is needed, or to the places where the ore was taken from. So the iron, more exciting than this might be that the iron technology is slightly younger than the production of the terracotta. So it was not that the production of iron, I think once this was one of those hypotheses, caused the manufacture of terracotta, because people now know how to deal high temperatures, and that the production of terracotta was a kind of a byproduct. It's quite clear that all dates we have for iron metallurgy are in the calibration plateau. That means between 800 and 400 BC, while there are a few radiocarbon dates which are before the plateau. I mentioned that between 800 and 900. So iron is younger than the terracotta, but it is still among the very early horizon in sub-Saharan Africa. And the big question is, did they invent it, or was it imported from somewhere else?
In the corpus of iron objects that you have, it's mostly weapons? Or do you have ornaments?
There are almost no complete objects made out of iron. Okay. We just have a bracelet, a small axe, and the other parts are broken, and in many cases not more than just a little bit of rust. totally recycling of material which was highly expensive.
In some of the examples that you showed, the terracotta is quite red with what looks like confetti, white speckles throughout it. What exactly is that?
Yeah, this is temper. This is very typical. If you once get one where this kind of temper is not involved, don't buy it. Yeah, the temper is necessary for the production. If you don't use it, the clay will crack during firing. It's it's very typical, but originally this kind of temper was not visible. They all were slipped by a fine clay material, which is preserved when the terracotta were found deep in the ground, 1 meter and more. Then this is still there. If it is in the upper levels of the deposits, this fine-grained material simply is disappeared by soil formation processes, and then they look like this here, where you can see all this confetti.
Sorry if I missed this, if you said it before, but did you mention what purpose these terracottas served at the time that they were created?
That's a big question.
Meaning, do you get what I'm saying? Like, why did they create them?
Yeah.
Why are there so many? Because it doesn't seem like they're not like true to life figures of people who actually existed, right? And they don't actually look religious.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
And they're very well made.
Yeah.
So why would they make them? Like we don't do that in our day and age. We don't just go around making figurines. Like why did they do that then?
That's definitely the big question behind all these studies. But, well, as in many other cases in prehistory, you hardly can give a final explanation because they don't tell us. Yeah, even the whole of the rock art in Africa, why did they make all these paintings, thousands and hundred thousands of engravings all over in Africa? We don't know, actually, but of course we have our ideas. And it was the hope that the context in which we find the terracotta give us some idea, but there is no context which tells you the story. This is the reason why we produce them. Yeah, it could be. We believe that it somehow has, of course, a ritual purpose, which was in Ancaster worship located. The snakes are involved. The snakes are also very often related to this kind of worship.
I have a question on them. And then we have one more, and I think then we round up. But I wanted to ask, have you ever thought, you and your team, that these heaps of broken sculptures could relate to some iconoclastic, if you think what's happening in the Near East or what happened in Timbuktu, could it be, have you ever thought about that possibility? That maybe, it was destroyed by some other people, civilization, breaking in, destroying the sites?
And then buried carefully in the ground?
Probably not, you're right.
Well, we have, I couldn't show you. I overestimated the time I was allowed to speak. There is a similar object like this here. Maybe I still can. This is another one. But there is another one where we can reconstruct what has happened. Yeah, and it simply was that first the terracotta are broken, intentionally damaged, but then not the whole terracotta is buried in the ground. Always a few parts. The other parts were taken somewhere else. Yeah. If you are under violence and you want to destroy something from somebody else, why should you take out from each a few and carry it home or carry it somewhere else? Then they were deposited in a flat pit, and then they made a big fire because we found enormous quantities of charcoal. And finally, the mixture between the fragmented terracotta and the charcoal is carefully sealed with a plaster of stones. So this looks, you want to get rid of these materials because they had fulfilled their purpose and they should not come back. This is somehow the intention. And this is hard to be explained by others who destroyed the materials.
Okay, so I think we round up. Thank you very much for coming and for your interest. If you have further questions, we can discuss them.